Hello and welcome to AVNA Foundation's EmpowerED webinar, Empowering Treatment Partnerships. My name is Sophia Casbolt and I'm the Program Manager at AVNA Pancreatic Cancer Foundation. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. So I have just a little bit of housekeeping to go through before we start. I need to let you know that the information presented in these webinars is of a general nature and should not be considered personal or medical advice. Always seek independent advice relevant to your specific situation. The opinions of the presenters are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of AVNA Foundation. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please get in touch via the Q&A chat bar on the right or email me at sophia@avnasfoundation.org.au and we'll do our best to help sort these out. A recording of the webinar and slides will be available from our website, avnafoundation.org.au, and only those presenting in the webinar today will be in the recording. During the webinar, attendees' mics and cameras will be off. So now I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our presenter for tonight, Michelle Di Vito-Smith. I'll let Michelle tell you a little bit more detail about herself, but as a brief introduction, Michelle has an honours degree in pharmacology from the University of Adelaide and over 25 years experience working in the biopharmaceutical industry, leading the implementation of clinical trials across Australia and New Zealand. She developed and implemented patient-centric strategies across clinical trials to enhance community and patient awareness, engagement, and participation in clinical trials. So tonight, Michelle will be talking about access to innovation through clinical trials and special access programs, partnering with your clinician and care team, and how to be informed and empowered to drive your treatment. So after this, we'll have about 10 minutes for questions. So please send through your questions at any time via the Q&A panel on the right. And if any questions come through that you also want answered, you can upvote them in the chat. Questions most relevant to today's topic or more general in nature will be prioritised. And if you have any questions that are specific to your circumstances, these are best directed to your healthcare team. Okay, so now I would love to hand over to Michelle. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Sophia, for the opportunity to present today on behalf of the AVNA Foundation. The AVNA Foundation is near and dear to my heart, and I will let you know why very soon. So I'm, so happy to be able to and pleased to be able to provide you with some insights today based on the agenda items that Sophia has provided. So as Sophia has said, I have over 25 years experience in the biopharmaceutical industry, and my area of expertise is in clinical operations, which is implementing clinical trials across Australia and New Zealand. And I've also had some short stints in China and in Bangladesh. When I was doing this work, I was inspired by the opportunity of being able to give patients options through the clinical trials that I ran with my team. And in those clinical trials, there were some amazing breakthrough medications and new medicines that were being developed. And it was that motivated me every day to get up, to be with my team, to ensure that patients had the options and new innovations through clinical trials. So in the past, probably in the last 4 to 5 years, I wanted to do more for patients. And I was involved in projects where the patient was at the centre and at the heart. And so we could look at ways to improve patient experience and create awareness around clinical trials. So there were some projects where I worked on in developing a framework for partnering with patient advocacy groups to create awareness of the clinical trials that we had ongoing. And also a project where a clinical trial website was created for several trials, several key trials, to support patients with education and understanding about the trial in very simple terms, and then being able to connect them to qualified people for more information. So I was getting closer to understanding the patients on our trials, but I was never close enough. And in the last 2 years, it was in actually November in 2018, my mum was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic pancreatic cancer. And my whole world turned upside down with that diagnosis. She was 66 at the time. And it made me think about doing more for patients and wanting to be able to provide patients with all the options and all the knowledge that I have. And that's what I've done for my mum. I've become a carer, and I've also become, I'm the eldest of 3 siblings. I've also become the responsible for treatment decisions, given my knowledge. So I have done this virtually. I live in Melbourne, and my family, my mum lives in Adelaide. So at the moment, during the COVID situation, it has been difficult, but we continue to make contact through our various platforms available to us. And I must say that my mum is defying statistics. She continues the fight, and she's doing, she's stable, and we just had the results come through this week, and she's doing really, really well. She really is a superstar. And it really is her journey that has taught me how a patient can become empowered to take control. So let's go through access to innovation in healthcare. So what is innovation? Where is the innovation? Why do I need innovation, and how can I get access to innovation? So these are the topics that I'm going to cover in this part of the presentation. So what is innovation? Examples of innovation in healthcare include any new medicine, a new device, a new diagnostic tool to diagnose a disease, new surgery or new ways of doing surgery, a new practice, a new chemo regime, for example, changing the way that a chemo is given, diet behaviour or new preventative. All of these are examples of amazing innovation that exist in healthcare. So where is the innovation? So what I've done here is provide you with an illustration of a timeline around drug development. So if you have a look, you start off with the lab and laboratory testing, and then move into animal studies. The particular animal models are chosen to further investigate the new product under development, the new innovation. And then we move into clinical trials, which are human trials, to further assess the safety and the efficacy of the new innovation. All going well, that innovation and all the evidence and the data that is developed across the laboratory, animal and clinical trials studies are then provided to the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, which is our government body that approves the new medicines and new agents. Now, before that approval process, there is another group, another area of innovation, and these are access programs. And this is a phase where the products are not yet approved, or they may be approved and not yet commercialised. So we'll touch on that today. And then once the TGA approves the new innovation, it then is further reviewed by 2 other committees, the PBAC and the MSAC, so the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee and the Medical Services Advisory Committee, for them to be listed on the PBS or the MBS. And that's where the cost effectiveness is reviewed. So you'll hear a lot out there about, bench to bedside, and basically this schematic provides you with an understanding of that innovation development process from the bench in the lab to the bedside on the PBS or on the MBS on a pharmacy shelf, for example. So the next set of slides, I'm going to give you some insights into clinical trials. So what is a clinical trial? A clinical trial is a research study that tests whether a new treatment option or a new innovation, such as a medicine device, all of those examples I gave earlier, is better than standards of treatment in a given condition or disease. Clinical trials are important in advancing the development of new treatment options in the field of medicine. They are a pivotal step required for the development of the new innovation for humans. And as I showed you earlier, there is a development time frame and timeline. They can involve healthy volunteers for the early phase studies and patients for the mid to late phase studies. There are 3 phases. You may hear about phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3, and this is dependent on the life cycle of the development process of the innovation. So phase 1 is the early stages of development. Phase 2 is midway, and phase 3 is in the late stages of development. So getting more exposure, more patients exposed and experienced with that particular new innovation. The clinical trials provide the body of evidence. It's the data that actually is given then to the TGA in our jurisdiction to demonstrate that the new innovation is safe and it is effective. It does what it's meant to do in that particular condition. And this is further assessed by the PBAC and the MSAC. With clinical trials, there's no cost to you as a patient, and you get expert care, expert monitoring, and through the process, you actually learn more about your condition and about the various tests and what they mean. One thing too that's very, very important about clinical trials is they are a primary mechanism by which patients can gain access to innovation before the regulatory approval and before commercial availability. So it's the first stage where access is supported. So a world without clinical trials, what would that look like? So if you have a look at this pictorial, you can see that there wouldn't be a label that would instruct you on how to take that medication for the right outcomes. So the clinical trials actually inform your label. You may have a label that says, take 1 tablet twice a day, morning and night. Where does that information come from? It comes from a clinical trial that proved that the medication taken in that manner gave the patients the right outcome for that condition. Similarly, without clinical trials, you wouldn't have new innovation, new exciting products to treat conditions on the pharmacy shelf. The shelf would look quite bare without great innovation, without promise, without hope for new medical breakthroughs. So in summary, clinical trials advance the development of new innovation. They provide the evidence to support the safety and effectiveness of new innovation compared to standard of care and current practices. They are a way of getting early access to innovation in a safe environment, and they provide options for patients where sometimes there are none. So I encourage you as patients to really think about, if you haven't before, about a clinical trial, and encourage you to ask the question of your clinician, is a clinical trial right for me in my treatment plan? And what I've provided you here is some questions that you may want to ask your clinician. You know, what clinical trials are available for me? You know, where are they located? Some clinical trials can be located within the institution where you go and see your clinician. Others may be located in other hospitals within the state, for example. And how will they impact my treatment plan? What are the possible risks and benefits? And this is important because with anything, even with taking a medication, there are risks and there are benefits. So it's important to have an understanding of this about the clinical trial that may be offered to you. And always don't hesitate to ask your clinician these questions. And how do I find out more about clinical trials? And what I've done here is to provide you with some resources, and there is a fact sheet that you'll be able to download from the AVNA Foundation's website, where you have these resources available to you, and there are some great links to some fact sheets from various organisations within Australia and also globally. And also some amazing videos by some fantastic researchers in Professor Judith Trotman at the Concord Hospital in New South Wales, and also Dr. Han Quach, who's haematologist at St Vincent's Hospital here in Melbourne. So they have a great ability to try to really simplify what a clinical trial is and the importance of clinical trials and the wonderful participation from patients and in being part of medical development. There's also registries, and I've given you 2 registries here. There's also links to the registries in the fact sheet. And these registries provide a list of all the clinical trials. Now, the first registry here is clinicaltrials.gov. It's an international registry, and it has somewhere in the vicinity of 352,000 clinical trials listed there. A lot of the sponsor pharmaceutical companies are required and mandated to register their clinical trials, so you'll get a lot of trials here. And this is usually my first port of call for registries and finding clinical trials. The other one is a local one. It's our registry here that covers Australia and New Zealand, called the ANZ Clinical Trials Registry. And of the international trials, there's roughly 20,000 clinical trials that are being conducted here in Australia across various therapeutic areas and conditions, and they can be located in this registry in an easy to find manner. Now, one thing that I must warn you is that the search facility is quite easy. You can put in pancreatic cancer and it will bring up all the trials. The language used can be quite complex and quite scientific. And I know that there are organisations that are looking to improve the patient friendliness of the registry so that they're easier to understand. So just be aware of that, and that's why if anything that you find, if you decide to do some trial finding yourself, please reach out to your clinician and go through what you found with your clinician for further advice. Okay, so with all that information, I really want to encourage you to ask the question, is a clinical trial right for me? And the reason that is because clinical trials are not integrated right now in routine clinical practice. So therefore, your clinician may not even offer you a clinical trial or may not even have that discussion with you about clinical trials in general. So that's why I encourage you to ask the question first and really, really get an understanding from your clinician about where a clinical trial might benefit you. So clinical trials are additional options for patient care plans. And I feel that they should be proactively integrated into a patient's treatment plan where applicable. And this is important. It's important for you to know what your treatment plan is about and where potentially a clinical trial may benefit you. There are some great healthcare providers, some great clinicians who are investigators on clinical trials, and they would generally connect their patients to clinical trials where they see a benefit. But then there aren't, in other institutions, there may not be researchers who are clinicians who would routinely connect the patients to clinical trials. There may be also an opportunity bias in offering clinical trials. So there might be some institutions that may offer a clinical trial only within the clinical trials that they have ongoing. For example, the Royal Melbourne Hospital may offer only the trials that are being conducted at Royal Melbourne Hospital. But it's really important to consider trials at a national level across all of the states and within the state, because there's many hospitals within the state that may be participating. And it's important for you to know who is participating and whether it's right for you to travel to that particular institution for that clinical trial. Some patients also look at clinical trials beyond our borders and internationally. At the moment, that's very difficult in the times of COVID, but that is also an option that some patients take. Also in our healthcare system, there's public versus private healthcare, as we know, and sometimes the offering of clinical trials at public versus private is different, and that can come down to sometimes to time with the patient. So all in all, there is a healthcare gap where clinical trials are not routinely offered to patients. So I would encourage you to discuss your treatment plan with your clinician and ask whether a clinical trial would be appropriate. And if you think about your treatment plan from diagnosis to your first treatment, to your second treatment, to your third treatment, and so on, you know, where in my treatment plan would a clinical trial be appropriate for me? So now we're going to move to a quick poll, and Sophia's going to help me with this. So would really like to hear from you on this question. Did you know about clinical trials before this webinar? Could you please check yes or no and submit your responses? Okay, how are we going, Sophia? How are we going with that question?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Should we start the next poll as well?
Okay, and then we'll have the answers.
Oh yeah, I think hopefully you can see the answers. So we have 86% said yes, they did know about clinical trials beforehand. And 14% have said no, they did not.
Excellent. That's really good to know and very encouraging that the majority of our audience is aware. So the second question, have you discussed or been offered a clinical trial? Check yes or no.
Okay, and so we have 67% say no, they have not been offered or discussed clinical trials, and 33% have said yes.
Okay, again, that's a great response. Thank you to everybody, and an area of opportunity for sure. Thank you, everyone.
I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have talked about clinical trials. Now, another area of where you can find innovation is in access programs. So access programs can be offered anywhere between the end of clinical trials or the end stage of a clinical trial and before TGA approval. And this type of access program here is called a TGA Special Access Scheme. And the other access programs that I've listed there are available after TGA approval and before commercialisation, so listing on the PBS or the MBS. And these access programs can be group programs to a group of patients, like an expanded access or a product patient familiarisation, or they could be single patient programs, otherwise known as compassionate access or named patient programs. So these access programs provide another option to be able to get access to a particular product, and they serve well if you've had genomic profiling of your tumour, either a biopsy or a liquid biopsy, a blood test, to really review your biomarkers. And you can actually then, with knowing more about your tumour type, be able to target potential products in this space that may be able to support you. And again, that's a discussion that you have with your clinician, because these types of access programs are clinician initiated. So the clinician puts forward the request for access. There may be some potential out-of-pocket costs with running the programs and getting access to the innovation in these programs. And they're mostly administered by sponsor companies, and by that I mean pharmaceutical or biotechnology companies or collaborative organisations. One thing about access programs is there is a lack of transparency, and there's also a healthcare gap here, like there is in the clinical trial space, is that some investigators, some clinicians are not aware that there are particular products that may benefit patients in access programs. And here's some information that's been brought together by the founder of Imagine Health, Jason Macy. And basically, on average, a cancer drug funding takes 49 months from the first application. And many medicines do not attain reimbursement, so that's getting on the PBS, because of perceived cost ineffectiveness. So it takes 49 months, so that's a long time for commercialisation. And there is then the potential to access these compounds and these innovation during this time. There's also an estimated 2,000 cancer products in company pipelines across all oncology companies, with 72 cancer molecules or cancer innovation compounds forecast to be submitted for funding in the next 5 years alone. Again, another big opportunity for access programs to be able to get hold of an innovation that may benefit. And there are many options for patients that can be accessed outside of Australia, but these are not commonly seen as options because the oncologists lack the time to search and the information is difficult to obtain. So that really talks about the transparency issue around the access programs. And over 90% of oncologists report offering patients options that are contained to the PBS. So 90% will default to what's on the pharmacy shelf, what's on the PBS, despite over 95% of patients wanting to be fully aware of access options and other options through innovation. So imagine if health is at the moment has an amazing platform under development, so that you are aware, where you'll be able to search as a patient and also as a clinician in particular to support them with providing treatment options for you, particular products potentially targeting a particular mutation in your cancer, and also clinical trials that may support your treatment plan as well. So there's some great innovation around the corner in a platform to bring this information together. And there's also a lot of innovation, not just in access programs, but also in finding clinical trials for patients as well. So again, I encourage you, as well as talking about clinical trials, which, as we saw in the poll, is happening, which is important. Also discuss your treatment plan with your clinician and ask whether a product in an access program would be appropriate across your treatment plan. So we're going to move to another poll with 2 questions. So did you know about access programs before this session today? Could you please check yes or no? And Sophia, I might have you come on because I can't see the responses.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Pleasure. So far, 100% of people who've responded have said no, they did not know about access programs before the webinar.
Okay, so a massive area of opportunity, and it's good to know because it actually then is able to support us as patient advocates, as the ABNA Foundation, to find ways to do this.
We've had another response. So we've had 88% have said no, they did not know, and 13% said they did know about access programs.
Okay, great. Still a majority.
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Sophia. And another question. Have you discussed or been offered a product in an access program? Yes or no?
So again, we have 14% said yes, and 86% said no.
Okay, so obviously the person or the people that have said yes, they did know, maybe have had that access. Okay, that's great to know, and a big area of opportunity, I think, for patients, care teams, and also for clinicians. Thank you, Sophia.
Thanks, I'll hand back.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, let's move on. Why do you need innovation? And I feel it's important that as patients, as carers, that you're aware of all your options, not just what's on the PBS, but the non-PBS options through clinical trials and access programs, because these are alternative options to complement your treatment plan. and they could be at any stage of your treatment plan. There may not be options when you discuss or when you raise the question about a clinical trial or the question about an access program at that particular point in time. But then, maybe after you've tried another treatment, the option may become available because research is dynamic and it keeps changing every day. So be aware of that just because there may have been no options or at that point in time, that they're not, further down the line. Innovation's important, through access programs as well, because there could be some amazing targeted therapies that may be able to support with any genomic profiling that may have been done, where you understand your mutations and it targets a particular mutation. And sometimes there's medicines out there as a targeted therapy that may have been tried and tested for another cancer, but what has been found is that particular cancer may have had a particular mutation for that targeted therapy, and you may also share that same mutation in your cancer. So there may be an opportunity again to look at that targeted therapy that may be able to support you. And again, it's a discussion that you have with your clinician. The innovation space, clinical trials and access programs may be the only option for your next treatment, so it becomes critical and important to look at these. And all of this, knowing more about this, actually helps inform decision making at the end of the day. So the fourth part of the innovation section is, how can I get access to innovation? So first of all, and always, seek expert advice from your clinician. Start the conversation about clinical trials if you haven't done so. Start the conversation about access programs. You can also reach out to patient advocacy groups like AVNA, the AVNA Foundation. They're here to support you, they're here to educate you and provide you with options. And thirdly, patient advocates like myself to support you with further education and also with options. Some patients are very health literate and feel empowered from day one and are very happy to self-navigate and do their own research and take that to their clinicians. And so if that's the case, then you can search for clinical trials using the clinical trial links that are downloadable from the AVNA Foundation website. And you can find trials for discussion with your clinician. You can also search for companies that may have a product targeted to your genomic mutation profile or biomarkers. So at the moment, that's the way to do it, because there is no platform to be able to do this in an easy manner, like the CancerQ platform. So this is another way of finding out more information. It is cumbersome. It does take time to search for these products. And also, as I've mentioned before, searching for access programs. Importantly, always review your options with your clinician, with your care team. And this is so that at the end of the day, you have the expert advice to be able to make an informed decision. Now we move to partnering with your clinician. Partnering with your clinician is probably the most important aspect of your treatment, of your care, of quality care. So what does your relationship with your clinician look like? Is it like this? It's one of respect, it's one of trust, but there is one-sided communication. from the clinician to the patient. There is one-sided decision-making from the clinician to the patient, and therefore there is a one-sided control from the clinician to the patient. In this situation, what happens here is that the relationship is very dependent on the clinician, and it makes for an unempowered patient. And this equates, being an unempowered patient means that, you know, there is no patient voice in this relationship. And it's very, very important to be heard and to be able to inform the clinician about your needs as a patient and your wants as a patient. Now, if your relationship does look like this, it's, you know, it may be when you were first diagnosed, it may look like this, and that's okay, because it takes time to build a relationship. And maybe in the beginning, you're still trying to understand your condition. You're trying to understand this new world of pancreatic cancer, new world of options, new world of treatments and chemos, and you know, what does it mean for me? How am I going to live with this? So it can start this way. But what I hope is that it becomes like this. It still is a respected and trusted relationship, but now there is two-sided communication. There is two-sided shared decision-making, and there is also shared control of your treatment journey. And this is now creating an interdependent partnership, and one that is more empowered. Another important aspect is to really understand the multidisciplinary team that is around you, that is supporting your clinician with decisions that he or she is making about your treatment plan. So what you'll find, and I encourage you to ask your clinician, you know, who else is supporting my care plan? And you may know some of these people. There may be your gastroenterologist, there may be your dietitian, there may be a nurse or a chemo nurse that you see in the chemo suite. There may be your surgeon, or there may be other allied health professionals that you turn to, for example, a physiotherapist. You are at the heart of this multidisciplinary team, and it's important that you are aware of who they are and what they are doing to support your clinician to drive your treatment journey and the decision-making process. And what it is hoped that it becomes is something like this, that you as the patient, together with the clinician and the multidisciplinary team, come together, inclusive of you, working together as a holistic team to drive your treatment journey. And this is really showing that as a patient, an empowered patient, a team member of your treatment journey, that you take an active role and you are in the driver's seat rather than in the passenger seat. So be informed and empowered to take control. How do you do this? My guidance, step one, is to be curious and to ask questions. And maybe in the beginning, you may not feel comfortable to do that. I know my mum wasn't comfortable at all. I asked a lot of questions for her, and sometimes she didn't even want me to ask the questions because she didn't want to know the answers. So there was times when I went to appointments with her and I respected her wishes and I didn't ask any questions. But over time, and I've seen this with my mum, she's now felt that she's at the, she has in the past year felt comfortable to ask the questions and been stronger to receive the answers to the questions. So So what I've done here, and what's also available on the resource fact sheet that is downloadable from the Abner Foundation website, is some questions to ask. And they might not be for now, but they could be for later. They might be for your carer, or they might be for a family member to raise. So just be aware, be curious and ask questions. What else is needed to be informed and empowered to take control? By asking questions or having a family member ask questions, what you're doing is you're enhancing your knowledge about your condition. You're enhancing your knowledge about chemotherapies, about what's on the PBS, about clinical trials, about access programs. And what this does is it increases your health literacy and your understanding. And that then leads you then to be able to take control. Also, know your cultural and personal preferences. We're all different. We may have some religious beliefs. We may have some cultural beliefs that we want our clinician to understand, and they may be non-negotiables for treatment decisions. So be yourself, be your true self, and be able to articulate any cultural and personal preferences with your clinician. As I mentioned before, engage family members, and I'm sure that happens all the time. And I've known in my mum's situation that, you know, between me and my siblings, you know, we come together and we do discuss and mum's support and the best way to be able to tackle her visits and chemotherapy. So that's most important, and especially when a patient is newly diagnosed, it becomes very important to have family members around you as you start your journey and become more empowered to then take control. As I've mentioned previously, that collaborative partnership with your clinician is essential. It is essential to the best quality care that you can get for yourself. And it's also important to explore alternate innovative options, and they're the options that I've described to you through clinical trials and through access programs. As you become more empowered, challenge recommendations, challenge the decisions your clinician's making. Why do you think this clinical trial is important for me now when it wasn't before? And be prepared to do that, because clinicians are there to help you understand, and they're there to ensure that your journey is the best journey possible. Also, connect with patient advocacy groups like the Abner Foundation, which is so important. They're a resource of information and support. And also other patients in the chemo suite. And I can say this from Mum's experience, where she, at first, she didn't want to go anywhere near that chemo suite. And I was with her, the day of the educational session, she didn't want to go in there. And then the day of her chemo, when we both walked in together, she went from being very scared and hesitant and reluctant to now she's very chatty in the chemo suite. She talks to, she's made so many friends, those with pancreatic cancer, those with other cancers, so much so that, she will ask patients about what treatments they're on. And sometimes patients say, look, I don't know what chemo I'm on. And Mum will take their files, with their consent, and say, oh, you're on Abraxane gemcitabine. Oh, yes, I've been on that. And how are you feeling? And, what side effects have you had? And I remember having this side effect. And so that has really helped Mum, in establishing new friendships with people that are experiencing cancer and pancreatic cancer. And she's been an enormous support for these patients, and she doesn't even know it. So be informed and empowered to take control. So some key takeaways from today to summarise. Be aware of all your treatment options and not just those on the PBS. And as we saw today in the poll, access programs are an area of opportunity. So ask your clinicians about particular potential products in access programs. Consider the innovative options available in clinical trials and access programs. And question your clinician if you are offered, is this right for me and why? Ensure you have a robust treatment plan and you understand it. Don't be afraid to ask, what is my treatment plan? What happens, for my first chemo? What is this? And what happens if I don't tolerate it? If it doesn't work, what's my next chemo? Or my next clinical trial? Aim for a collaborative partnership with your clinician and care team, because this will ensure that together you are part of the multidisciplinary team, you're an active player, and you are in the discussion with them about your care plan, so that you can drive your own treatment journey by being informed and being empowered. So with that, I end with a poll question. So do you feel empowered to drive your treatment journey? Yes or no? Sophia? I think you're on mute. We can't hear you. I think we've lost Sophia. There, that's better. Great.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
We've had 89% say yes, they do feel more empowered to drive their treatment journey.
That's wonderful. That's a great outcome and a great response.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, so now to Q&A session. Do we have any questions, Sophia?
Yes, we do. We do have a question. So one of them is, do doctors offer molecular profiling to patients, or is this something that you need to ask for?
Look, I think it's something that you need to ask for. Given my experience with my mum, it was in the front of my mind to know more about mum's pancreatic cancer, because no two cancers or no two pancreatic cancers are alike. So it's important to understand your mutational profile. And I had to raise this with mum's oncologist to seek an avenue to get the profiling done. So please ask your clinician about that. Now, I do know that there is a clinical trial called the MOST trial, where genomic profiling is offered as part of the trial, free of charge. And I believe there are some conditions around whether you have had the opportunity of experiencing treatments before getting onto this trial. So when you're having that discussion with your clinician, ask them about, are you eligible for the MOST trial? Because there you can get free genomic profiling done. Genomic profiling does come at a cost, and it was quite significant. We went, the option that was offered to me was the Roche Foundation one, profiling that was done in the US. So mum's sample had to go across to the US to be tested. But it gave us a real indication of her mutational landscape. And, you know, I continue to look at that and that report and look for new clinical trials that may target those particular mutations. So it is important. So in essence, please ask the question if you haven't had that done.
Thank you. And yeah, I was going to ask about cost as well. So thank you for covering that. Somebody else has asked if, just to clarify, when you say clinician, do you also mean oncologist, or is this the same thing?
Yes, I do. Yeah, clinician is a general term, but in the scheme of things for pancreatic cancer, it is your oncologist.
Great, thank you. Somebody else has left a comment just saying, thank you, it's been a very useful session. And somebody has just asked how your mum is doing, if you feel comfortable answering
absolutely. That. Yeah, absolutely. She's doing really, really well. So 2 years since diagnosis, we started her first treatment option was FOLFIRINOX, which was heavy duty. We knew it was going to be a tough chemo, but my mum's quite a strong woman, and she was 66 at the time, and I guess a fit lady working full time. So we decided to go with that option first, and that did reduce her tumour size, the primary tumour size, down in a significant way for us. And then we went on to gemcitabine-Abraxane combination, second to that. But before she did start the gemcitabine-Abraxane, we went from FOLFIRINOX to a modified FOLFOX, because the irinotecan in the mix was quite, had some toxic effects for her in terms of gastrointestinal effects. So we decided to have that modified FOLFOX there for a while. Now, I must say, before going on Gem-Abraxane, Mum, I was looking at clinical trials, and there was a product called OncoSil, which is a new device which is providing radiotherapy pellets into the tumour site. And Mum was on the tail end of that clinical trial and was able to access that technology. And her oncologist talks to, because Mum keeps saying, you know, I have metastatic pancreatic cancer, but, you know, will surgery ever be an option for me? And he said, no, it won't be. That OncoSil treatment that you had is like you had a surgery. So, you know, it's something that Mum's always, you know, wanting to ask. And so he's put that context around that OncoSil treatment as her surgery. And that worked really well for Mum in stabilising her tumour and reducing it a little bit as well. So after that, it was the gemcitabine-Abraxane combination. And, you know, with any chemo, there's side effects. And the FOLFIRINOX had the gastrointestinal side effects, and gemcitabine-Abraxane for Mum had more sort of peripheral neuropathy side effects. And, you know, it was quite her quality of life with, you know, with her hands and feet in walking and in being able to pick things up was quite, you know, was difficult for her and challenging. And she was frustrated because she's quite a fit woman and would keep, you know, she's continually trying to keep busy around the house. And she, you know, she's a cleaning fanatic, and she's always, you know, doing that. So that sort of, you know, really affected her quality of life. And then doing, more research and searching, I found that there was a new liposomal irinotecan formulation that was just at the end of clinical trials and in an access program. And I asked Mum's oncologist, is this something that would be right for Mum, given that she's having some of these toxicities? Could we look at this new formulation? And that's what she's on today. We got her on a named patient access program, and she's 8 cycles in, so 8th cycle today, and she's tolerating this better. She had scans this week, as I mentioned earlier, and her pancreatic cancer, is stable. And stable is just a brilliant thing, and Mum said, I just said to Mum, congratulations, that's a fantastic news. She goes, well, what do you mean? I said, because it is stable. It's not growing. It's stopped in its tracks. And as long as your quality of life is okay and is good for you right now, then you're doing a great job. So that's a little bit about Mum's journey that she's taken, and thank you for that question. She continues the fight, and I'm there at every turn, making sure that no stone is left unturned.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It sounds like you're both doing fabulously in that respect.
Thank you.
And I think we might be out of time now, unless anyone has a last minute question. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for today's presentation. It's been so informative and interesting, and really great to hear about all of the things that are out there and worth asking about. And also, just thank you so much for sharing your experience with your mum.
She continues to be my inspiration, I tell you. And even my inspiration in doing what I'm doing, because I do want to help more patients. People keep saying to me, and they've said to me when they ask about my mum, oh, your mum's so lucky to have you. And I'm like, well, not really. I'm just doing what I know and, providing my experience that the wonderful industry has given me over the years. And then my thoughts go straight to people and patients out there that don't have somebody like me as part of their, in their family, as part of their care team. So that's what's really driving me to do what I'm doing today. So you're welcome, Sophia.
Thank you so much.
An absolute pleasure to present tonight.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody who attended and for filling out the polls. And also, I'll just let you know that the fact sheet that Michelle mentioned earlier is also in the handout section, just next to the Q&As in the webinar. But we'll also put that on our website, and we have some more resources about clinical trials and various other aspects of living with pancreatic cancer. So please feel free to check those out if you like. Thank you so much, Michelle, again. And everybody, we will see you later, hopefully at the next webinar.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.